There's something trending on Twitter this morning that just kind of makes me giggle because I was totally a part of this. So, somebody posed the question, why was Gen X so into swing dancing? Well, I can tell you my evolution of swing dancing. It was already an underground thing from like the 80s. Basically, a lot of old punks transitioned and started doing what was like punk swing type music. The band that was most... there was the whole rockabilly scene, right? So you have like the Paladins, you got the Sun Demons, you got all these Big Sandy and the Fly Right Boys. You got all these rockabilly bands, and even Reverend Horton Heat has said that Southern California has the best rockabilly scene in the world. He has said this. Okay, so you've got all these rockabilly bands. But why did swing become so popular in the 90s? Swing, there was one band that really took off, and that was Royal Crown Review. I have Daniel Glass, who's the drummer, who was a main force behind writing a lot of their original music and arranging stuff that they covered. And Eddie Nichols are both on my friends list because I have been following these guys since 95, 96. So, I'm looking at YouTube, and YouTube is positioning the Gap commercial as coming out in 98. It came out way before that. It came out before Swingers. That commercial came out before Swingers, and that was what brought swing into the mainstream. Because Swingers itself was a small movie. But here's the interesting story behind Swingers. Royal Crown Review had just made a deal with Warner Brothers. And they were, Daniel told me this. Daniel fucking told me this. They had just made a deal with Warner Brothers. And when they got approached to be, because they were formerly, before they got this deal, they were the house band at the Derby in Los Angeles. The one that's off, there were two locations. They were the house band at the one off Los Feliz. And I think Hillcrest. Right? I think the restaurant itself was called Michael's, but the back bar was called the Derby because it's not like the one that they had in Hollywood. I think closed first, and the building itself is kind of shaped like a derby hat. So it was called the Derby, and it was I think it was probably the more famous one because of the musical history that kind of came up out of this. So Royal Crown Review was the house band. And then they got a deal with Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers executives fucking advised them that Swingers, the movie Swingers, was too small for them. So they advised them not to do it. And so, what's that dude's name? Dude's name who did Swingers, who fucking wrote Swingers. He went to the new house band. The new house band that they pulled in after Royal Crown Review got a little too big for their britches was Big Bad Voodoo Daddy. And they got fucking called, and they got the deal. They got the movie, and so you had a slightly inferior band end up on that movie. God, how things would have been different for Royal Crown Review if they had done that movie. That movie did take off. It's a cult classic. It's a cult classic. But it was not shown in wide release. It was something that you had to go to, you had to, I was dating Chuck at the time, my old rockabilly boyfriend from the 90s. And we had to drive up to like the South Coast Plaza to see it because it was like in limited release and shit. And I remember he took me to see that movie. And we walked out and he's like, "What'd you think of it?" And I said, "I felt like I went to a party where I wanted to leave, but I didn't drive. So I was like forced to stay there." Forced to wait until my lift was ready to go. That's what it fucking felt like to me. So Swingers has a cult it's got a cult following, right? It is very much a guy movie. Kind of like Master and Commander. That's another guy movie. And that other one that Brad Pitt did, where he and his two brothers all marry the same woman. What the fuck was that movie? Those were all dude movies. Swingers is a dude movie. Though I am more likely to rewatch Swingers than any of the other two movies. They're all dude movies. But Swingers was not what set off the swing revolution of the 90s. It was the Gap commercial. Brian Setzer had covered Jump, Jive, and Wail. So Brian Setzer was the first person to really revive rockabilly swing culture back in the 70s. Let's be real. And Grease came out. And you've got Olivia Newton-John and John Travolta doing the movie for that. So they had a resurgence of 50s culture in the 70s, because this is fashion, right? Fashion and pop culture resurges every 20 years. It's a cycle. So you've got that happened in the 70s. Brian Setzer and the Stray Cats brought rockabilly into mainstream popularity back in the 70s, 80s, right? And he kept going. So he transitioned from doing his three-piece band to doing big band. And this was all bubbling up in underground for many, many years before that Gap commercial turned it widespread. That's where it comes from. So I know they're discussing it right now. That every time I try and pull up the ad, they say it came out in 98. It was out before Swingers came out. I remember it being out. It was like one of the earliest things we saw. I don't know, maybe my timeline's off, but I can tell you that that particular commercial is what made it mainstream. What we were doing before that commercial was underground. It was underground. And I know a lot about LA underground because I've been a goth. I went to Hollywood High. I've done a lot of underground clubbing culture forever. And I can tell you the Gap commercial brought it mainstream. That's what happened.